Instincts. From the physiological point of view, there is no substantial difference between what is called instinct and reflex. The complexity of the acts cannot be considered such a difference. In the behavior of animals, especially such as birds and insects, their amazing adaptation to environmental conditions attracts our attention. The transmigrating birds are able, having flown thousands of kilometers, to return to the village which they had left in the autumn, even to the same nest which they had forsaken half a year previously. It is well known how easily the carrier pigeons orientate themselves. The life of bees and ants in large colonies has since ancient times excited the most vivid interest. Indeed, how many most diverse acts in organizational orders can be observed in beehives and anthills? During the first 20 days of its life, the bee carries out work connected with the implementation of various functions which correspond to 6 specialties. During the first 5 days following its birth, the bee works as a cleaner in the beehive, later as a distributor of food. During that time, the bee intensely develops special glands which are adapted to the feeding of larvae, whom it starts feeding on the 6th day. While carrying out this function, the bee simultaneously acquires the ability to produce wax and starts building honeycombs. For the next 8 to 10 days, the bee carries out a few more functions in the beehive. It acts as a guard and as a receiver of honey, and toward the 20th day of its existence, it leaves the beehive and starts collecting honey. We trace the development of the function of one bee, the so-called worker. The interrelations between the bees which compose a beehive are very diverse and complex. We shall cite an example of a bee scout which, by means of chance, signalizes or signals all other bees that it had found a source of food, often located within 100 meters distance or even within many kilometers away from the beehive. It is not surprising that the behavior of bees since long ago has been not only a subject of study and observation, but a subject for discussions as to their intelligence and acts of volition. And what is not the surprise and admiration of people who had observed for the first time the marvelous dams built by the river engineers, the beavers with their cleverly constructed habitations, the little houses, well founded. The beavers build excellent dams, measuring 2 to 5 meters, which block the flow of water and raise its level to that of the shore. This enables them to flood the food stores, ensures a hidden approach to their habitations, and makes it easier to transport food to the little houses. At times, the beavers create large flooded areas by constructing a whole system of dikes and embankments with a flooded area as large as 2 hectares. Besides building the dikes, the beavers ensure the preservation of a constant water level through various devices, drains or roller, superimposed on the entire dike. If the casing of the dike is damaged in one section or the other, the beavers perform complete repair work the following night. Thus, these remarkable little animals ensure the completion of construction work and the thorough preservation of the dikes. Many phenomena of nature, truly appearing as marvels, were long ago noted by people who observed the life of fish, birds, and insects. These phenomena required explanation. It was natural to assume that the animals were endowed with intelligence. However, there were many facts which spoke against it. The matter did not seem much clearer when the idea of instincts was brought forward. This idea remained vague and involved until the materialistic basis of the so-called mental activity had been culcated. The teaching of the soul and instinct differentiated at once the conception of the mental activity of animals and man. A special designation was needed to emphasize this difference. The literary heritage known to us enables us to assume that, as far back as 2,500 years ago, This difference between the mental functions of animals and man have been alluded to. The animals were described as possessing blind, unconscious impulses and propensities which had been given the name of instincts. The word instinct means a natural impulse. There is no need of dwelling on the description of other idealistic points of view, whose representatives attempted to find an explanation of the instinctive activity. They were not only based on unscientific premises, but actually contradicted the facts. Thus, one of the characteristics of instincts which made them so enigmatic and mysterious was their alleged high purposefulness. However, some actual facts demonstrated that the instincts, while preserving under certain conditions an undoubtful purposefulness, continued to function after these conditions had changed, thus becoming senseless and absurd. As an example, we can mention the hatching of eggs by a bird, when the real eggs have been removed from the nest and replaced by an egg-shaped stone. If we recover the eggs of an eider and put them aside, the eider would sit down on the former spot, warm it with its body, and hatch an empty spot on the rock, though its eggs are lying not far away. The bees continue to scale with wax the cells of the honeycomb from which the honey has been taken out. The bees continue to seal with wax the cells of the honeycomb from which the honey has been taken out. A hatched baby chick will start pecking at once. However, it will peck not only at food, but at everything in sight, even sunlight spots, beads, and other non-edible objects. The true pecking for food develops later. As the chick grows up, and as the reinforcing effect of the food stimulus asserts itself. Thus, the purposefulness of instincts is relative and appears only at a certain stage of maturity. A true scientific, i.e., materialistic analysis of the question of instincts was made for the first time to a full extent by Darwin. In his first important work, The Origin of Species, Darwin clarified numerous facts which are connected with the instinctive activity of various animals and gave them a materialistic interpretation. He demonstrated that the seemingly startling purposefulness of instincts is a result of the environmental adaptation of animals. Thus, Darwin raised the question of the origin of instincts. In stating thus the question, he had to follow it up by criticizing the assertion of the immutability of instincts. He showed, in citing a number of facts, that certain instincts were subjected to change under changed environmental conditions. These changes of instincts occur with great difficulty. Darwin indicated, for example, that wolves, foxes, jackals, and other animals, even when domesticated, still attack chicken, sheep, and pigs. Their puppies transferred from the locality of domesticated animals could not be broken away from the habit of attacking pigs and sheep. Obviously, one generation was insufficient to suppress that instinct. At the same time, it is well known that our domestic dogs, as a rule, remain indifferent to other domestic animals and attack them in exceptional cases only. Darwin came back to the problem of instincts in his book, The Manifestations of Emotions in Man and Animals. In this, he completely refuted the idealistic and religious ideas of the independence of the animal behavior from the material conditions of its habitat. He contrasted this idea with his biological teaching of evolution, which shows the gradual development of psychic as well as instinctive actions of animals and man. In regard to the material causes of the expression of perceptions, which lead to various manifestations of diverse sensory states in the animal, the state of fear, joy, etc., Darwin wrote, quote, There is no doubt that as long as we continue regarding man and all other animals as independent creatures, our natural aim to investigate as much as possible the causes of expression will be considerably inhibited. By means of this doctrine, the teaching of the divine origin by Berkhoff, one can equally well explain virtually anything under the sun. It proved to be just as ruinous to the science of expression, as to any other branch of natural science. Those who will accept the basic premise that the organism and habitats or habits of all animals have been developing gradually will see all problems relating to expression in a new and interesting light. In studying the origin of psychic phenomena, sensations, habits, in man and animals, Darwin thus refuted the legend of the creation of the world by God and the immutability of humans and animals which he had created. However, though the views of Darwin on the nature of instinct represented undoubtedly a step forward from the biological point of view, still they did not explain the substance of the instincts. Darwin could not do it, for the contemporary level of the development of physiological science did not make it possible. This possibility presented itself only when Sekhanov and particularly Pavlov developed the physiological science of the acquired reflex reactions which ensure the adaptation of the animal to its environment. Pavlov related instincts to the most complex unconditioned, i.e. inherited, reflexes, and in connection with this did not even use the term instinct. We must point out that, depending on the level of the evolutional development, the mechanisms of instincts may differ to a considerable extent, and no one will seriously identify the instincts of a higher primate with the instincts of a rainworm. However, there is a certain community in these functions which relates primarily to their reflex nature. Thus, instincts, same as any other functions, are determinate, i.e., are manifested in connection with certain definite causes originating in the animal's environment. This fact must be stressed, for there were attempts by some scientists to attribute to the instincts the role of the inner force of the organism, or the inner imperative stimulus, which is not controlled by the organism as a whole. In analyzing the instincts of higher animals, we can visualize their mechanism more or less systematically or schematically as follows. As has been mentioned already, the basis of instinctive action is the most complex, or as it is called, the chain reflex. It means that the complex instinct is composed, like a chain, of separate links which represent simple reflexes. The links of the complex instinct are closely tied together and are acting reciprocally on one another. One link activates the next, and, as a result of such successive change of separate phases of the developing chain reflex, some very involved action of the organism is taking place. This can be illustrated by an example of the development of the phenomenon of vomiting, one of the instinctive acts. When something harmful enters the stomach, a protective ejection takes place, the discarding of the gastric content, which prevents poisoning of the organism. This process is effected as follows. First, the entrance to the stomach becomes patent, while energetic muscular contractions of the abdominal wall and of the diaphragm are simultaneously getting into action. The contractile movements of the stomach proper are also increased. The exit aperture of the stomach closes up and the gastric content is pushed upward to the entrance. The larynx and tongue are raised, which prevents the possibility of the entry of the vomit material into the respiratory paths. The ever-increasing contractions of the abdominal wall and the contractions of the stomach the latter taking place in an unusual reverse direction. Also, the onset of esophageal contractions, all combine in the ejection of the gastric content. An analogous complex train reflex is represented in the act of swallowing. We are effecting it instinctively, not realizing its complexity. However, the instances of entry of food particles into the nose or trachea, as for example in laughing while we eat, remind us of the importance of coordination of separate reflexes during the normal act of swallowing. We cited, as an example, one of the comparatively simple instinctive acts. Of course, some of the instincts, the sexual for example, are connected in animals, especially in birds, with some peculiarities of habit and even of the external appearance, the color of plumage, characteristic vocal reactions, special games, or, on the contrary, fights. They can be much more complicated in their composition, however. The substance of the matter does not change, and we see at the basis of this instinct primarily the same complex unconditioned reflex. On the example of the sexual instinct, we observe what particularly clearness another characteristic of this function, which is present in various degrees in other instincts. That is, that the instinct is a manifestation of the functions not of the nervous system alone, but is closely connected with diverse chemical influences in the organism. Thus, for example, the change in the chemical composition of the blood and other fluid in the organism in connection with hunger, starved blood, plays a very important role in the manifestation of the food obtainment instinct. The changing chemistry of the blood is the cause of manifestation of reflexes which affect the act of respiration. The above-mentioned glands of internal secretion and the hormones which they secrete play an extremely important part in enhancing the manifestation of instincts. We know that castration, done at an early age, inhibits the manifestation of the sexual instinct. We must mention another point for the complete physiological characterization of instincts in higher animals. Let us visualize a dog eating from a bowl placed before it. The dog seizes the pieces with certain frequency. If at this time we shall try to distract the dog from the food container, we shall easily observe that the animal, instead of turning around in response to the new stimulus, will continue to lap at its food with greater frequency and avidity. The same physiological phenomenon can be observed in the manifestation of the defense instinct. Let us observe two dogs engaged in a fight. Our experience has taught us that the best way to separate them is to pour water over them. It means that only a very strong and unusual stimulus is able to stop their fighting. An attempt to drive them apart, to separate them by means of gentle pulling, will virtually lead to the increase of the aggressive reactions of the animals. What do we see from the point of view of the physiology of the central nervous system? The substance of this reaction was ascertained by Ukmitsky, the eminent Soviet physiologist and academician, who named this function of the central nervous system a dominant function, dominata. Under dominata, we understand a group of nervous centers which entered into reciprocal action and which determine a certain behaviorist reaction of the animal. The peculiar characteristic of the dominant group of centers is its faculty to collect, so to speak, the stimuli which at moment are affecting the organism and to become stronger at their expense. This is precisely what happened in the two-cited examples. The stimulation which originated in connection with pulling the dog by its collar would under usual conditions have caused the animal to turn around in the direction of the pull, or perhaps to wiggle its tail, etc. But since under the described circumstances, a food dominata in one case or a defense dominata in the other has been formed in the central nervous system of the dog, we shall find that there is no reaction to the new stimulus, but a definitive enhancement of the reaction to the previous stimulus. The analysis of many instincts shows that at their basis lie the reactions of the dominata which may dissolve naturally, i.e. disappear upon the satisfaction of the instinct, for example, satiation in the case of the food instinct, or may be switched over to another dominata under the effect of a new and stronger stimuli. The suppression of the food dominata and the appearance of a defense syndrome in case of threat to life. A dominata formed in the central nervous system may acquire the role of a factor which determines the direction of the animal's reactions, and with great force at that. In the male frog during the spring period appears a dominata of embracing, which manifests itself in hugging the female. If the male frog is subjected to other stimuli, the embracing reflexes increase. It becomes stronger even after the removal of the higher brain centers from the male. We have already indicated that the higher centers of the brain in the more developed animals, the cerebral cortex, may affect and change the unconditioned reflexes to a considerable degree. This is important to the understanding of the mechanism of instinctive functions in higher animals. In this case, the conditioned reflexes, or the dominata nucleus, which has originated in the higher brain centers, may exert their effect. The understanding of this very important question will enable us to learn to what extent the instincts of the animal can undergo changes. In the old physiology and psychology, this problem could not appear. There, the general census of opinion was the acknowledgement of the immutability of instincts. This was, to a great extent, due to the absence of knowledge of the nature of instincts, as well as the lack of understanding that in higher animals, the regulatory and directing functions are affected by the most developed areas of the central nervous system, two cortical centers of the brain. Lately, experimental data have been obtained which attest to the fact that the instinct is not a mysterious property of the organism and yields to objective study as well as to mutation under the effect of changes in the environmental conditions of existence. To corroborate this statement, one may refer to the experimental results obtained by one of the Soviet investigators, Labashev. Proceeding from the fact that the duration of the light period during the day determines the egg laying of a chicken, Labakev decided that, by using artificial light stimulation corresponding to daylight strength, he could make 2 days and 2 nights out of 24 hours. As a result of this alteration of the regime, hens which experienced 2 6-hour days and 2 6-hour nights increased their egg-laying faculty. The resulting eggs had perfectly normal properties. Even such a stable instinct as the food instinct can be changed under definite external conditions. Here is one experiment. A pike and a crucian were placed in an aquarium, which had been previously divided into 2 parts by a glass partition. In one section the pike was swimming, in the other the crucia. Stimulated by the food instinct, the pike is trying to attack the crucian and knocks itself repeatedly against the glass partition. The pike, of course, received other food to satisfy the instinct. After repeated unsuccessful attempts to get hold of the crucian and constant collisions with the wall, the pike finally lost its appetite for the crucian. Shortly after, the partition was removed, and now the pike was swimming together with the crucian without attacking it. The causes which affected the change in the instincts in both of the above described instances are different. The egg-laying faculty of the hen was increased through the change in the principal environmental condition, the duration and shift of the night and day periods. In the case with the pike, we have a change in instincts under the influence of the newly created and much stronger conditioned reflexes of a protective character, the knocking of the pike against the partition. One could cite many examples which attest to the possibility of changing the instincts. We have already mentioned the importance of the body chemistry in this respect, and especially its hormonal functions. The Soviet scientists conducted remarkable experiments in sex alteration. Everybody knows that the differences in the external sex characteristics of roosters and hen are very marked. If the ovary in a hen is removed and replaced by the seminal vesicle of the rooster, or if the sex glands of the rooster are removed and replaced by the ovary of a hen, one can observe how the rooster loses the characteristics of its plumage and vocal reactions, and how it begins to resemble a hen. The hen, on the other hand, acquired the characteristics which make it indistinguishable from a rooster. It is of particular interest that not only the external appearance but even some behavior traits, belligerence, are lost by the rooster and are then acquired by the hen. These facts clearly attest to the possibility of changing the instincts in animals. This conclusion is very important. It corresponds to the basic teachings of Darwin, Pavlov, and Maturin. It refutes the idealistic and religious ideas of the I don't know why I keep stumbling over that word, immutability. I'm getting a little tired, so I stumble, I apologize. Immutability of the existing world without the intervention of God. It is important to emphasize the fact that this conclusion equally relates to the sphere of psychic activity. Instincts are also characteristic of man. However, it was precisely this field which harbored many idealistic theories and attributed to man a kind of personality in depth controlled by his instincts. These instincts were considered a force not subject to any influence whatever, acting in some fatal manner, and constituting, in the last analysis, the fate of man, independent of him, and predestined from above. On this false basis originated attempts of a theoretical justification of sexual looseness and reprehensible immoral acts, attempts to justify drunkenness, gambling, etc. We must definitely condemn and refute these attempts which are contradicting scientific positions. As to the matter of man and his instincts, its solution is perfectly feasible and unequivocal. Higher animals, and especially man, differ from other animals in that their brain has reached the greatest development. Its sections which have acquired the faculty of the distribution and direction, as Pavlov said, of all organic functions, the cerebral cortex, achieved in man the highest development. On this basis appeared, as explained above, the second signal system of oral and speech-conditioned reflexes, inherent in man only, which ensured the faculty of higher thinking, of forming new conceptions such as honor, duty, patriotism, etc. Therein lies the source of many examples in history and in our present life, in the recent experience of the Great Patriotic War, when the strongest sensations of fear, pain, and physical suffering become subordinated to the conscious volition or volatile direction of man. Let us recall Alexei it's typo, Alexandra Matrosova, the hero flyer Costello, Zoya Kosmodem-Yanskaya, the Kozomols of Krasnodon, the immortal Panavlovs, and many others. That was a lot of Russian names at once. I apologize for not having them completely translated before the reading. We would cite many thousand examples from the immediate actuality of our days. These facts leave no doubt that the instincts, food defense, self-preservation, the fundamental problem, whether to live or not, were decided not the way they are being decided in the world of animals. Thanks to the intervention of higher social stimulating motives, the instinct was depressed, inhibited, and the scene was taken over by the consciousness of responsibility, humaneness, and patriotism. Quote, "Live not the way you want, but the way God ordered," taught one of the proverbs of the revolutionary Russia. It reflected the philosophy of doom, hopelessness, and of the impossibility of resisting fate, which is hanging over man. The teaching of the soul and its roots in the form of instincts allegedly enslaving man is fully refuted by modern scientific data. One cannot any longer dispute the assertion or assertion of Soviet psychology and physiology that the instincts of animals are subject to changes under the effect of various external and internal conditions. As far as man is concerned, the right to bear that name so that it wounds proud, as A.M. Gorky used to say, depends to what extent man is able to control his instincts, his willpower, and to what extent he dedicates himself to serve noble purposes.